Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by the man known as Shwinny Pooh, the host of the fantastic Strickland podcast to preview RJ Barrett's season.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Our Locked On Knicks, and today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because that would make you an everydayer and by default one of my best friends. If you want to join that exclusive club, remember to subscribe on YouTube and hit that notifications bell so you never ever miss an episode, and be sure to do the same on the audio side. And then if you really want to commit to the whole friendship thing, be sure to subscribe to our Subtext. You can hit the link in the episode description. By doing so, you will receive daily texts and updates with our latest thoughts on the New York Knicks, post-game thoughts, pre-game thoughts, in-game thoughts, and you can text us back and share your thoughts as well. It is a whole lot of fun, so we hope you join that community. We're really making an effort to grow it out. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, and this is a really fun episode with Schwinn, who is one of my favorite Knicks adjacent personalities. Is that the best way to say it? I don't really know exactly how to describe what he does, but he is awesome. Probably single best person you can follow on Knicks Twitter in terms of entertainment, intellect, and just getting a whole lot of great information related to the team. So without further ado, we are going to dive deep on RJ Barrett. Small caveat to this episode: we recorded it on Monday, so it was before the first preseason game. With that, let's get into it right now with Schwinn. All right, guys, as promised, I am joined by the, 5-6-time reigning MVP of Knicks Twitter, the host of the fantastic Pod Strickland, the one and only Shwinny Pooh, to talk RJ Barrett. Schwinn, how's it going, man? I'm sorry about your Bills the other day. I don't mean to bring that up early in the podcast, but that was all I saw on your timeline, so I had to mention something.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that they lost, but the injuries they got were pretty significant. So they've had like 3 now in the last 2 weeks, all of the defense, and at each level of the defense. So Knicks are back, though. So that's good.
Who would have thought that would be kind of like the thing that would make you feel better, right? That's something.
Yeah. I can't complain about them bekind back, but yeah, I'm excited for the season to start. Although I guess tonight's not really like the season starting, but the first kind of like inkling of basketball being back. So
and the first inkling of RJ Barrett, at least domestically, being back in our lives. He had an interesting playoffs, right? And it's so we spent all off season talking about it. And I still don't even totally know where I fall on it, because it's almost a Rorschach test in its own way of like, how do you interpret it, right? Where I think if you just watch the games, you'd say, all right, like he was by and large awesome. Like, I thought his defense was much improved. I thought his effort was really good. The efficiency didn't skyrocket dramatically from the regular season, but when most guys fall off in the playoffs, it was a testament to him that it stayed the same. And when you do a little bit of a deeper dive on it and you see like how many free throws he got, you actually say like, all right, he actually was, like, considering the level of competition, like pretty dramatically more effective scoring the basketball and passing the basketball and defending. And then you look at that net rating number and you're like, all right, there was still like he was their worst player in that capacity. And they really struggled when he was on the floor. And you could say, all right, was that on him or was that on Tibbs for playing with Josh Hart a whole bunch? But I say all that to say, like, did the postseason, like when you, like after a few months sitting with it, does it change your opinion of him as a player at all? Or do you just kind of come away with like, all right, RJ kind of is who RJ is?
I wouldn't say that it changed my opinion of him very much. Not to say it was, obviously I much preferred watching what he did in the playoffs versus what I thought was pretty poor regular season last year for him. But I think the main thing is like seeing what he did isn't so surprising to me, because I'm like, you should be able to do these things. Like, there's no reason for him to be as poor defensively as he was during the regular season. There's no reason for him to be making kind of like just being like an inconsistent or shaky decision maker offensively to the way he was in the regular season. And then obviously to see how he played in the playoffs, that was really, really encouraging. At the same time, I feel like people are going a little bit over. Like I felt like people were going a little bit overboard with how good he was in the playoffs, considering like I don't know how to like really parse this or feel about it because I think it's kind of like a complex and not straightforward thing to evaluate. But like the way I feel about it is this: Julius Randle and Emmanuel Quickly, I would say probably those two guys were like one, they were. I guess 1, 2. Okay, no. So those two players were, first of all, they were extremely important to the Knicks during last season, and they were key components to them finishing third in offensive rating, which, like, quite frankly, before the season, I don't think anybody would have expected the Knicks to finish third in offensive rating. They're really, really important to that. And as soon as they fell apart in the playoffs, both of them offensively, the Knicks were literally, I think they were the worst offensive. They had the worst offensive rating in the playoffs, maybe aside from Cleveland, which, obviously. And so like that to me is one, it's especially in Randall's case, it's discouraging given his age. But like it kind of demonstrates how important those guys are to keeping their offense afloat. And I don't know what it says because like obviously Brunson played great in the playoffs, but the offensive rating sucked. But like I don't know what it says that RJ played better. And yet the offensive, like he couldn't really buoy the offense to a level that like could somewhat offset the fact that Randall and Quickly play like such crap offensively. So I don't really know what that all means. Like it's encouraging. I think he definitely had a stronger close to the season than he did, what we saw towards the end of the regular season, especially I thought was like very concerning. So for him to turn around the way he did, especially after like kind of the first 2 games of that Cleveland series where he wasn't particularly great, was really good to see. Basically played really well after that until the final game of the season, which was that game 6 in Miami. And to be fair to him, like really aside from Brunson, nobody played well in that game. So I don't know. Like I don't think it changes how I view him, but like, and I mean that either way. Like I was disappointed in his regular season, but I still was like, okay, I don't think this is actually the true level of what he is as a player. And I think the playoffs is probably a more accurate representation of what he is. At the same time, like, I think just people should pump the brakes on like, or I mean, not that it matters now. And I kind of feel like this conversation has died down a bit, but when we're talking about like just how good was he in the playoffs, I'm like a little bit less on the bullish side than a lot of other people are, because you like if you really break down like the net rating and all that type of stuff in the playoffs, and look, I said it at the time, like I think in a lot of ways some of his issues with his playoff net rating was like the lineups that Tibbs was playing him in so often with Josh Hart, and like I still believe that. At the same time, even if you take out like the Josh Hart RJ minutes, it's not great. Like it's okay, it's fine, it's better.
Yeah,
and I just think like ultimately the guy is going to be he's going to be one of their top 3 players in usage. He's going to be a top 3 offensive option. And no matter what you think or how you feel about his play and whatever, like there's just some very basic things. Like if he is going to be at that type in that role and in that level of usage, he just has to be more efficient. Like we can talk about decision-making and, how his defense is and blah, blah, blah. But like, if you're in that role, you've got to be a more efficient player. And I think like ultimately for him, it's like, hey, can you get back to like, I mean, he doesn't need to shoot 40% from 3 again. I don't think he will, but like, can you be like a league average 3-point shooter? And can you just kind of cut out some of those off balance, funky, fading away, like layup things he takes sometimes? And instead of, can you just convert that into like a kick out to somebody for 3 or whatever it is? Like there are paths for him to buoy his efficiency. And I think those are worth considering, but he has to actually do it. We can't just keep like saying, oh, it'll happen then, or we'll look at this 20 games. And it's like, no, like we need to have a full season of him being consistent, because we just haven't seen it yet. And like the highs are high and then the lows are like, what the hell is this guy doing? And so we really just need like, hey, can you come in? And, you mentioned him playing in FIBA, like hopefully that does give him a leg up where it's like, he should theoretically be in as good a shape as he's ever been at entering a season. And so you've got to believe that like if there's a chance for him to just really hit the ground running in any given season, it's this one. Also, just remember, like, preseason doesn't matter. So if he does play well in preseason, great. If he doesn't, I don't really care. It just matters to me what he does when the actual games that matter start.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard with him because he's the definition of just when I was out, he pulls you back in, and it's every single year because he gets off to these just disastrous starts to seasons, and you're sitting there and you're like, all right, I guess this just isn't going to happen for him. And then he'll play well for a month. And then to your point, at the end of the regular season, like, oh God, like it doesn't look so good. And then the playoffs, like, is this moments where you're like, that's my guy. That's who I've been invested in for 4 or 5 years. And I've been pouring my heart and soul into. And so much of the conversation and the expectations around him, like, it's impossible to escape the fact that he was the number 1 high school recruit, that he was the number 3 pick in the draft. And it's almost like we kind of have to reassess at this point, 4 seasons in, and say he kind of is who he is. And so much of his effectiveness, to your point, is dictated by who else is on the floor. Like, I went back and looked, and when it was him, Hart, and Brunson on the floor in the playoffs, they scored 110.6 points per 100 possessions. They gave up 124 points per 100 possessions. So they were terrible with those lineups. But then you just switch out Hart for Grimes in those lineups, and all of a sudden they had a +8 net rating, and it looked pretty good. And it's just kind of tilting the levers of his games. Like, all right, to your point, can you cut out 2 or 3 bad shots at the rim? Can you hit 1 more 3 a game, which is a lot? Can you hit maybe even like half a 3, like one more 3 every 2 games or so? And like, he becomes a much more effective player. It's just, who does he, I really think like how he sees himself. And sometimes for guys with those types of expectations coming into the league, it takes, right, like 6, 7, 8 years for them to be like, all right, I might just not be that dude. I might not be that perennial all-star. And for RJ, sometimes it's for better, like we saw with Team Canada, where he hit the dagger against Team USA. I think if he thought of himself like, all right, you know what, I'm just a role player, maybe he doesn't take and make that shot. Maybe he doesn't have those moments against Cleveland where the Knicks desperately needed offense, and he was just torching Karis LeVert, attacking the basket. Like that is like that, like, hey, I'm that dude type of confidence. But also, like, at a certain point, like, he has to recalibrate his game to fit in on this team long term. And that's kind of where I want to go next. I mean, do you see a scenario where, let's just say, if I told you in 3 to 5 years that the Knicks were a team that would make the NBA Finals, like, do you see a world where RJ Barrett is the starting small forward on that team? Or do you just think it's inevitable that for the Knicks to ultimately reach where they want to go, obviously they have to upgrade on their current talent, but is that ultimately going to have to include RJ going out just for this team to make sense? Will the Knicks ultimately have to trade RJ Barrett to take that next step and be NBA Finals contenders? We'll get into that and much more with Schwinn in just a sec. But first, everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Unfortunately, as time goes on, as a society, we were going to be dealing with more and more natural disasters, so it's best to be prepared. And that's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care, so you don't have to get caught unprepared when the worst happens. Get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com.
I mean, he's still pretty, I mean, he's 23 now. So he's still like at an age where I don't think, you know, if you want to put some type of ceiling on him, I get that. Like, in terms of like, oh, he's not going to be a perennial all-star or whatever it is. Like, I think that's fair. And like, I'm somebody that thought he would be once upon a time. And like, now I kind of look at it and I'm like, look, if he is not a perennial all-star, but if he's just like a good, solid 2-way wing and can play his role at a high level, then I'm fine with that. I don't think we need.
Do you think he's willing to do that? I guess is my big question. That's what I don't know, and maybe it will take a few years.
Yeah, it's really tough to say. Like, just to go back to it for 1 second, like, so in the minutes he played with Josh Hart last year in the playoffs, they played 213 minutes together. RJ Barrett had a 52.8 true shooting, 27.4 usage. Funny enough, his EFG was much higher. It was at 50 with Hart than it was without him. And the team was, in their minutes together, pretty disastrous. They had a 106.4 offensive rating and a 115.9 defensive rating, so minus 9.5 net negative. And without Josh Hart on the floor, he had a 57.6 true shooting on 26.2 usage, just a 48.6 CFG. That's probably kind of indicative of like he's getting to the line more. And that's boosting his true shooting when Josh Hart is on the floor. Whereas when Josh Hart's on the floor, he's taking a lot more like perimeter catch and shoot shots because he has to. And the team was, again, this is the part that's always confusing me since like the offense still wasn't good. It's 107.5 offensive rating, but defensively they're 102.5. So like +5 net rating. So I don't know. Like it's a very weird thing. To go back to what you were asking me just now, like I don't know if he can recalibrate his game. There are times where, at times in the playoffs, you felt like, okay, like this is exactly what you want him to be doing. And then there are other times where you're like, man, you're really forcing it. And, kind of to his credit, like it's so weird because he deserves credit for like the fact that he can do what he does in the regular season, in the playoffs, like whatever, like the fact that he has that ability to just like, I can get downhill into the paint and like make, collapse defenses consistently, no matter what part of the season we're in, who we're playing and what the coverage is or whatever, like that is valuable. Like that is valuable in and of itself. And I think it's a reason why he is such a steady guy, like his demeanor and how he carries himself. But then you also have to think about it and be like, in some ways, because of how steady he is and how he almost feels like it doesn't really ever feel like a moment is too big for him.
Yeah.
I'm almost like, well, then is the playoffs like, should we like, it's almost like if everything is kind of the same for him in terms of how he approaches it, then I think that maybe we shouldn't go too crazy and like assume that the playoffs was a sign of like, oh, wow, he's taking a leap right now. Like I'm not there yet. I would like to see it in the regular season this year. Like I know like there's been this very weird thing going on with like Knicks fans where it feels as if now every conversation is just about what happened in the playoffs. And I get that. Like they are very important. They are the most important part of the season. I understand that. But it's kind of weird to like just judge everything based on that and then ignore the like entire 82 game regular season that occurred before that. And I'm just very apprehensive about that because we've seen players in NBA history like have good playoffs and it doesn't actually translate to mean anything down the line. Do I think that applies to RJ Barrett? I don't know. Like, I really don't. Me and Press have talked about this a bunch. Like, I'm pretty confident that last year will end up being like the worst season of his career. I'm not even counting his rookie season because it just is a different thing. Yeah. But I think that will be like the low point of his career, so to put it. And I'm pretty confident he's going to have a much better season this year. So I'm not really worried about that. I'm just worried. I didn't say I'm worried. I'm just like, I don't know what that means. Does it mean that he establishes himself as a player that the Knicks are now like, well, now if we want to upgrade on this guy, we have to get a top 10, top 7, top 8 guy or something? Or is it still a scenario where you could reasonably look at it and be like, well, if we even just get like, we can just name a guy that they were connected to this offseason. Even if we just get Zach LaVine, that would be an upgrade. Like, I think Zach LaVine's a good player, but I don't think he's anything. He's not like, to me, he's not a top 20, 25 guy, really. Mm. So that's kind of the question for me. Is it like, will he establish himself to the level where we're not even thinking about, well, if we want to upgrade, we'd have to go get a guy like Zach LaVine. And it'd be more like, well, we would need to get, whatever, pick a fucking 2 guard. That's awesome. Yeah. Or wing, or whatever you want to put it, but like we had to get Anthony Edwards, right? Like, oh, that would be an upgrade. Like, it's very hard to say. So I'm excited to see how he does this season, though. Like, I'm encouraged by what I saw in the playoffs cautiously, but I'm also like the cautious part of it is I just need to see it in the regular season. I need to see it from day one, and it's like forget even. Shooting efficiency matters, but it's like so much of it to me is the shooting efficiency at times for him, be it EFG, true shooting, whatever metric you want to use. It so often boils down to his decision-making. Like that kind of shifts his, plus efficiency, lower efficiency, whatever. And so for me, it's like, well, can you just be a more consistent decision maker? Because I kind of like, it sounds crazy because he's so young but some of the stuff where, can he be a bit like a pull-up threat? Can he be a mid-range scorer? And I'm kind of almost at the point where I'm like, I don't really know about that. And maybe that's not the path for him to be a really good scorer, and he doesn't need to be. Like, I don't know how much of a pull-up three-point threat he needs to be a good offensive player. I don't know that taking a bunch of mid-range shots because he can do it now or something would matter. I think it matters more like, hey, you get to the rim. Like, this is the basics of it. His game right now consists of catch and shoot threes and getting to the rim. Can you just be better at those things? Like, his efficiency at the rim jumped last year, and he was still very, very poor for a wing. So, like, if he just gets to average at the rim, if he just gets to average from three, now all of a sudden you're talking about a guy who's probably going to be like a 56, 57 true shooting and like plays a shit ton of minutes and is super durable, and that has value. So, like, it's just be better at the things that you already do. And I think that would go a long way for him.
Yeah, I think much like it was the second half of last year, it'll be big for him the minutes he gets with the bench. And I think that should amplify his efficiency, and the fact that you're replacing Obi Toppin with Dante DiVincenzo, how spread the floor is going to be. And look, I want this year to see some versions of that lineup with Grimes in there, because I just think the potential for the ball handling, defensive versatility, shooting is really, really enticing. But that lineup, like, if it lacks anything, and this is maybe somewhat down to Immanuel Quickley's ability to apply more rim pressure and be a little bit more aggressive getting to the rim volume. But RJ fills that role so nicely as kind of the fulcrum of that second unit. And then for him, I mean, this is kind of like the big thesis of everything we're saying, but it's the ability to have, I guess, just self-awareness a lot of the time. And that's an underrated skill for almost everyone in the league. And to say, all right, with the starters, to your point, like, I am, like, maybe I'm a catch and shoot 3-point guy. Maybe I'm a pump and go attacker. I'm creating off of what Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle do. And then with the second unit, like, he can be that guy. He can be sort of the center of attention. And I almost wonder at times, like, would the Knicks be better? And this is a total hypothetical, because Tibbs is never going to do this, but would the Knicks be better off if they started Immanuel Quickley, and Immanuel Quickley kind of got the minutes that have largely, and maybe less so the second half of last year, kind of been RJ's God-given right? And you're looking at a starting lineup that's pretty small at that point. But I think one that, based on everything we've seen from a net rating perspective, where all the numbers scream, like, the Knicks, at least in the regular season and in the playoffs, so small sample size there, were an elite team when Brunson and Quickley were on the floor together, and struggled disproportionately when RJ was on the floor. Would they be better if they leaned into that more? And I know there's never, that starting lineup change is not going to happen, but, like, could the Knicks be better off if RJ, like, played almost every single second with the bench, which I know he did for, like, a good proportion of those minutes last year, and you had Immanuel Quickley, and whether it's Josh Hart or, for my money, I'd have Quentin Grimes out there closing games. And I think it'll just, like, if RJ, in terms of his mindset, isn't going to shift, I wonder how changing the players around him can kind of push him in the right directions. All right, guys, to wrap up the show, what are fair expectations for RJ Barrett this season? What are the lineups, the situations that will most amplify his value for the New York Knicks? But first, I want to remind you to snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. An incredible deal. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, because the app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. I've already told you I'm harping on that Knicks over-under, now up to 45.5. I think it might even go up another one before the start of the regular season. So I would put some money down right now, because that feels about as sure of a lock as can be. I was going through because I wanted to mix it up a little bit. The Boston Celtics, who the Knicks played the other night, are playing in their first regular season. They're over under 54.5 wins. I kind of think post-Drew Holiday, that is a 60-win team. I think they're going to be absolutely dominant, as much as it pains me to say it, this regular season. So you can throw some money down there by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon and kicking off the NFL and NBA seasons. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that to be honest, I haven't really, like, banged this drum a ton. Yeah. But I do think, like, a lot of people have, is, you know, we never play RJ in, like, a small ball 4 thing and whatever. And, like, guess what? This year he's going to. That's going to happen. Like, it will happen at some point. It'll probably happen every single game. And I think, like, it is valuable to, if you're going to kind of stick with Tibbs as your coach, who we know has good and bad things, but one of the things that, however you feel about it, is that he plays a certain way. His rotations are kind of rigid. How he views lineups are kind of rigid. So forcing him into a scenario where it's like, no, you're going to have to play small. Like, you're going to have to play small for the 13 minutes a night that Julius Randle doesn't play, and you just have to deal with it. I think that's one, it's good in terms of like, if you can't make a big swing move for your roster, then you have to find other ways to potentially move the baseline. Do I think this was entirely down to them? No, obviously we know that Obi wanted out. And so that kind of forced their hand. And, you know, obviously also like, hey, look, let's be real. His value was not going to ever improve playing the role he was playing here. So that forced their hand to an extent, but I think their pivot was smart because I mean, look, me and you just talked about this before we came on, but like, you know, the Knicks kind of had a boring offseason. But if you really go back and look at it, at the time we signed Dante DiVincenzo, there was immediately like a ton of the beat writers were like, oh, who are the Knicks going to get to play the backup for? What's going to happen? Is there a big trade that's going to be made? And like, there was all this stuff. And honestly, I'm pretty sure I tweeted at the time. I was like, I honestly think they might just do this. Like, they just keep it and play small, and I'm fine with that. And obviously that's how it worked out. So like, I do think this is a conscious choice they have made to some extent after kicking the tires on other things. Like, again, we know they talked about that they at least discussed Zach LaVine with the Bulls. We know they at least discussed Paul George with the Clippers. So there was some kicking the tires on a more significant move, but obviously this is where they settled on. And I think it's important to like try to, again, move the needle in some ways. And looking at lineups that are smaller, that maybe have more speed, that can spread the floor more, not only are good for the team, but I also think are good specifically for RJ Barrett. Like, theoretically, the spacing of those units should be better, and they should play faster, and that should allow him more opportunities on the ball. As far as like, would I start quickly over RJ? You know, I think it's just how you want to really view it. Like, do I think the team would be better if they did that? Yeah, probably. I think they'd probably be a better regular season team. Do I think that it's actually the best thing for Emmanuel Quickley as far as like kind of pushing him in his individual development and really allowing him to test his boundaries? I don't think so, because I think when he plays the starters, even if you look at the numbers when RJ didn't play and Quickley did, like, his usage drops a ton when he plays with the starters. He just does not play the same role. And it's a credit to him that he can do that and it works. But I also think, like, yes, I know the playoffs sucked for him and blah, blah, blah. But the things we saw him do in the regular season were very, very, I mean, to be quite like special in some ways. And I think you don't get that from him if he's playing with the starters almost exclusively. So I'm fine with him coming off the bench. At the same, like, to me, it just says more about kind of, again, like, this is when you swap in Quickly for RJ, or you swap in Grimes for RJ, you swap in Hart for RJ, and you keep the rest of that lineup the same, the numbers speak for themselves. So this is just a matter of, like, RJ Barrett has to be better in the role that he is being asked to play. Like, and I think he can. Like, we saw it his second year, like, he played like a role similar to that. And he was really good. And he was, you know, he was a consistent two-way player that, you know, I know his overall efficiency wasn't great, but the fact that he was hitting the threes at the level he was, and then his defense was just so much better than what it's been the last couple of years. I feel like he's incrementally kind of gotten worse on that end. And that's why the playoffs were simultaneously encouraging and also like, what the fuck were you doing this entire season? Sorry about that. You're gonna have to mark that one down.
No, that was a deserved one. That was warranted, because I felt the same way. And you look at, like, I was literally just pulling this up before we got started. I got to find it again here. See, his steal rate in the regular season was here. I could let you guess it, but I think you
I know there he had a career low. It was 1.4 or something. Right?
It was 0.5, which was at his position first percentile. And that is not the best. That is the worst percentile. And then the playoffs, again, small sample size, but it doubled in terms of steal percentage and went up to 52nd percentile. And you're saying, like, all right, like, obviously he is not a monster explosive athlete, but he does have decent instincts. He has super strong hands. Like, he should be able to get a couple of steals. But to me, that screams activity more than anything else, right? Because he should not be last in the NBA in that capacity, given his athleticism, given his strength. And, like, that is maybe the most mystifying thing to me. Like, especially if you're going to soak up possessions offensively and take some bad shots, you better be making up for that on the defensive end. And that's where I always get bogged down with RJ when people who are really big fans of him and say he's still young and like there's time for him to learn and time for him to get better. Like, I agree with all that. But that's what's mystifying to me, Shwin, like how he got so much worse defensively the last 2 years. And if he's just better on that end, and to your point, 2 or 3 times a game where he's going to take a tough shot, passes the ball out, like I know we're going in circles here and saying the same thing over and over again, but it's that simple for him being just a dramatically better player for the Knicks.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really what it is. It's like, the thing with defense is it can be there always. Like, it can always be there. Your defense should be theoretically more consistent than your offense. And for him last year, it was consistent, just in a really poor way. And, I mean, again, I've talked about this with the Prez on our show. Like, I think to some extent he's in a tough position in the sense that because Tibbs won't switch much with Brunson in the lineup, and quite frankly, because Randall totally mailed it in on defense last year, like, it definitely makes him look worse as well, because he's kind of like, he has to play at a higher level to make up for that stuff. And he just didn't. So like, he's not as bad as he looked at times on defense last year. I think that lineup in a lot of ways exacerbated some of his shortcomings, but he wasn't good and he needs to be better. So like, I understand that it would help him a lot if they switched more, and maybe Tibbs will do that more this year, but like, you still have to be able, like, we've seen him fight over screens. Like, this is the same scheme they played in 2020, 2021, when he was a really good defender, or at least a really solid defender, if nothing else. And so we know he can do it. Like, he can do it. He just has to. And I don't know. Will he, won't he? It doesn't really matter what I think. It just matters what he does.
Yeah.
And again, I'm optimistic that he'll have a good season. I'm optimistic that he'll definitely have a better season than he did last year. So like, those are all good things for me. But when you ask, will he inevitably get traded or not? Like, if you put a gun to my head and you ask me, I would probably say yes. But I'd probably say yes about a lot of guys in this team. Like, just because this is not unique to the Knicks, by the way. This is like the NBA. Most players are not going to play for one team their entire career. Most players will probably get traded at least once.
I mean, Mitch is the only Knick who's been here for 4 years, right? Or him and RJ, I guess now.
Yeah, but no, Mitch has been here 5 years now.
5,
a year.
Or at least 4.
RJ and Randall have both been here for.
Yeah.
Like, this is the most continuity the Knicks have had in a long time. But at the end of the day, the Knicks want Joel Embiid, right? If the Knicks want Joel Embiid, guess what? Mitchell Robinson won't be a Knick. Like, that's the reality of the situation. Mitchell Robinson will not be a Knick if Joel Embiid ever becomes a Knick. And like, the odds are, like, RJ Barrett will get traded. Emmanuel quickly will get traded. Or Mitchell Robinson will get traded. I'm not saying all in a trade for Joel Embiid, but at some point in their career, the odds are that they will get traded. Like, the odds are Julius Randle will get traded at some point, maybe. Like, it just, Julius Randle already has played for 3 teams. Like, I know that he seems like he's been a Knick forever, but he's played for the Lakers. Like, he's played as long for the Knicks as he played for the Lakers, he played for the Pelicans. So like, Brunson's already been on another team, right? Brunson literally we acquired him in free agency last year. So when you just look at it, I mean, forget these guys. LeBron James has played for how many teams? 3 teams, right? Like, if LeBron James has not finished his career on one team, like, odds are anybody you ask will not do that. So, we'll see what happens, but like, would I love it if RJ put it together? And, I mean, I think there's a case to be made that if RJ just has, again, if he's not, forget all-star, like, let's say everything is relatively consistent from last year, but RJ just plays at a higher level. I mean, there's no reason to think the Knicks can't be, like, at least in the mix. I know that Boston and Milwaukee have still in the headlines with what they did this past couple of weeks, but like, the Knicks were really good last year, and you could say in a lot of ways, RJ kind of hurt them on the floor more than he helped. And even then, once they acquired Josh Hart, I mean, if you take out the last 2 games of the regular season when they basically just played skeleton squads because it didn't matter, they were on a 60-win pace with Josh Hart, and that's with RJ not playing like very, very well. And so if RJ just plays well, who's to say what this team could be? I don't know. Like, I think they could be really good, championship contender, whatever. I don't know. Obviously, like, ultimately we have to wait for the playoffs to come around. We need guys like Julius Randle and Quick and even Grimes, right? Like, to shoot better from the field than they did. And so, like, we can't say any of that for sure, but I do think this team I think this team is better than people are giving it credit for outside of like Knicks fans. And I certainly think that if RJ plays well, this team is, I think they could actually make some noise.
I think it's something. I mean, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. Like what we've been discussing over and over again on this podcast, where the Vegas over under, maybe it's gone up, but last I looked, it was 44.5. Yeah, and I'm like, I kind of sit there confused with you. Like I keep reciting that Josh Hart stat. Like even with those 2 games in there, 57 win pace when he was on the team. And then you look at the age of everyone. Like why wouldn't Emmanuel Quickley be a better player this year? Why wouldn't Quinn Grimes be a better player this year? It's hard to imagine that Dante DiVincenzo won't be an upgrade over Obi Toppin. And there's that concern there. Like, what if Julius Randle gets hurt? That could potentially be a big issue. But RJ Barrett, to your point, like, I don't think, and like, it's not even that, like, well, there were stretches where he was terrible last year. And like the season as a whole, like he still put up almost 20 points per game, efficiency be damned. That's something, right? And
he had good stretches. Like he was really good in December.
Yeah.
He was really, really good in December. And
great stretches.
It was, and so like we know that he's capable of it. It's can you do it for 6 months instead of a month or a month here and there? And so
I do think the FIBA thing is encouraging. Like to me, he looked athletically and a really good play. I know Prez was pointing this out. Like he was getting higher on like some like the half court dunks that just were layups at times, like especially at the beginning of the season last year for the Knicks. His finishing around the rim looked a little bit better. I mean, that was one of the things in the playoffs. His efficiency at the rim went down. His rim volume went way up and he looked really explosive. So all those things are encouraging. I'm super excited at the start of the regular season. Is there one thing we haven't mentioned yet before I let you go that you're just really excited to see, whether it's in the preseason or just like the first couple games of the regular season?
I think mostly just seeing kind of like how they handle the non-Randall minutes. Obviously, we have some idea that it'll be like RJ and Hart kind of doing a kind of like work share at the backup 4 minutes. But I am curious to see that. And, look, as far as you said, players that can improve, like I think a guy that I don't want to say people are sleeping on him, but like a guy that I think we should expect more from this year. And we already got kind of a sustained glimpse at it last season is Isaiah Hartenstein. I think he's a guy that they can get more out of. We know that he's a really good passer. Tibbs did not use that as much as, a lot of people, myself included, would have liked to see, but it's his second year here now. He's still like, he's the same age as Mitch, he's a young player. Yeah. And so I think he's a guy to keep an eye on because we know the skill set he has as a playmaker. And, as good a cutter and stuff as Obi was, the fact that the role that he was being asked to play, where he's playing obviously spacing the floor quite often, DiVincenzo is a better fit. And I do wonder if like Hartenstein is a guy that can kind of, if that works better for Hartenstein and he can get more and we can get more out of him as a playmaker because of that than we did last season. But yeah, he's a guy I'm definitely interested to watch this season.
I thought he was, I think it was under discussed, like how, like when we talk about the Knicks playing at that 57 win pace post Josh Hart, there was a lot of Josh Hart and how well he shot and all the little things he did. It was a lot of Isaiah Hartenstein, like becoming kind of Mitch Light as an offensive rebounder. And just, I mean, and you can take it all the way into the playoffs, like how aggressive he was around the rim. And it just felt like someone like almost like he was a computer and he got like a new chip in, like he just became a different and more aggressive player down the stretch. And they started taking advantage of his passing chops at least a little bit more. And like an RJ is one thing we didn't mention, but he was a big beneficiary of that. And RJ, like in those bench units, did a really nice job cutting off him. So I'm with you. I'm super excited for him. But it was Schwinn. Thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, can you tell everyone where they can find Pod Strickland and all the great work you do over there?
Yeah, you can find us obviously over at the Strickland, and you can give us a follow. It's like the Strickland Podcast Network. We have all kinds of stuff on there. We have Pod Strickland. We have the mailbags. We have a new NFL show if you're into that. So check that out. And yeah, aside from that, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Shwinny Pooh if you want. Yeah, that's about it, I think.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I reference the pod a lot on here, and I always say I think it's the single smartest Knicks pod out there. Like you will learn a lot about basketball, and it's extremely entertaining as well. So it's a great
appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, and we will talk to you all soon on Locked On Knicks. More coverage of the preseason, more player previews coming up right here on Locked On Knicks.